My name is Sinéad McNally. I'm a lecturer at DCU in developmental psychology, very early child development, and I teach developmental psychology and research methods on the Bachelor of Early Childhood Education. I also lead the Early Language and Learning Lab, which is a team of fabulous researchers who examine children's earliest play, language and learning experiences in education. One of the studies that we have done is actually on really at the heart of, I think, what we're talking about with regard to inclusion, and that is the social emotional development of children, such as children from migrant families for whom English may be an additional language. And it's a really important study from 2019 which showed that by the time children are entering school, a really pivotal transition in early childhood, children who were learning English as an additional language, their social emotional skills, their social emotional development was very comparable with children for whom English was their main language, and they were entering school with really good skills. So they may not have had very strong proficiency and vocabulary in English, but they were off to a really good starting point. And what we try to go into in that study is that this is a really important platform for then building on this really positive start, because we know that it's all about peer relationships and relationships with the teacher, building skills around socializing, being confident, having self-control and effortful control, and all of these things actually happen outside of language. They're not necessarily part of that language learning. And what we find is that children who may not be speaking the majority language, in Ireland that's English, they may actually have greater skills in reading body language, in understanding tone. So we're working with young children who are highly skilled in reading us as adults. So our role is critical really in what we do and how we show in our body language, in our behaviour, inclusion, and that they're welcomed and that they're seen as well as heard.
It is around gesture and, you know, having that welcoming face, a good face, you know, and eye contact, you know, you're still welcome. I've no idea what you're saying, but we'll figure it out somehow. And that way then, you know, the child is feeling welcome, and it's a good way to establish that relationship moving forward, to include them within the environment. And, you know, because they may be with you for a couple of years before they move on and transition into primary school.
I think the most important thing to take from that study is that we have the curriculum framework there to draw on. Ashter is a wonderfully inclusive curriculum, and I guarantee you that any educator has that knowledge base and those skills already. And I think it's actually gaining that confidence in a way to move beyond language. And I say that as somebody who very much would promote and share my research around the importance of language skills for educational attainment. That's really, really critical. But I think when it comes to inclusive practices for children coming from a variety of backgrounds, speaking a variety of languages, that actually the strongest or the best way we can start to include and think about that is to move away from language. So we're thinking about the non-verbal play context. So there's so many things that I guarantee you early childhood educators already know and practice, and it's being aware that they're already doing this by being responsive, by being warm and welcoming to all children.
Although there's lots of research out there around the value of play in supporting migrant children's language development, play offers a really unique and authentic context to support the social inclusion of migrant children within the early childhood classroom. So it's described as the universal language or currency of early childhood. It's that primary means through which children engage and interact within the early childhood classroom. And I suppose in this sense, play demonstrates the unique ability to transcend beyond language and act as a central vehicle for inclusion for all children within the early childhood classroom, supporting their peer acceptance, peer relationships and the formation of friendships, and in turn helping migrant children to support that sense of belonging within the peer community and within their classroom community. And that's, I suppose, really important from the literature, given that we know from reports directly from migrant children that they really have a strong desire to belong and participate in play with their peers. However, despite such reports, we know that they can experience difficulties accessing these socially interactive play experiences and consequently may remain perhaps on the periphery of peer play. And I think it's very much then where this comes back to the educator to set up that culture of inclusion and acceptance of difference. That it's not all about these verbal initiations in play, that actually in play it's the non-verbal initiations that are really important, and that it's this universal language for children within the early childhood classroom where they don't actually need to be able to communicate in the majority language. So I think, though it's very much as well in terms of the role of the teacher, developing that culture of inclusion and also supporting the development of peer understanding and awareness for them, I suppose, to enable the peers to be able to understand and accept non-verbal initiations for play.
The main thing that we talk about and we focus on in children's early development is primarily around children's sense of identity, their sense of self, that they feel welcomed. And this is part of a bigger piece of development called social emotional development. So oftentimes in education, and anyone involved in education will think about children's cognition, their learning, are they reaching certain milestones? But really developmentally, what we're focusing on in these very early years is children's social and emotional development. So if we're going to include children, that's really what we're talking about, that children are in responsive environments. So early childhood education, we would talk about it as a very naturally inclusive context for children, because it's child-centred, it's focused on children. It's really vital that all children in any setting and any context feels welcome and included and recognised for who they are. So we might not even make a distinction in terms of migrant families and children who are coming from different backgrounds, but we have to recognise children's experiences, their culture. We have to think very much around their experiences outside of educational contexts.
What I think is important is that we reflect on how it is that we engage with all of our parents within the context of the setting. You know, do we know our parents? Do we know their cultural background? Do we know, you know, their history, their story? Not in a personal way, but know what countries they're coming from, you know, what their background, what languages they speak. You know, because there's so much more to culture than just language. We need to embrace all elements of it, and we've so much to learn from other cultures that, you know, that come into our services and children that we work with, you know, and how it is that can enhance the experience for not only the migrant children but also the other children within the setting. You know, we've got so much to learn from each other. So it's about getting to know our parents, all of our parents, from the migrant backgrounds as well as from every background. That's part of being an inclusive environment.
When we're talking about inclusive practices, one of the most important things we can do is try to focus on not thinking about language as that barrier. So I think that's one of the myths, perhaps, that we think that to include children we have to think about children's language first, and hence thinking about inclusion in terms of children's social and emotional well-being is a really good starting point. Learning a second language, so emerging bilingualism, where children gain fluency in more than one language, is really beneficial for children's cognition and their educational attainment. So at first it may seem like children may not be doing as well, but it's actually quite beneficial for children. However, that is quite nuanced as well. So where children, when they reach primary school, once they get to primary school, even in the early years, we're trying to support children to learn, in this case, the majority language of English is really important. However, supporting 2 or more than 2 languages that may be spoken at home is really, really important for children, for their cognition, but also for their sense of well-being and identity. I think we have to be really clear in education programs for early childhood education that one of the key recommendations from research is that we encourage that the home language is spoken and encouraged, and that this emphasis on, oh, would you try to speak more English at home so the child is going to have more exposure, is absolutely not the way to go for young children. So the recommendation from the research base is to really support as much as possible the home language, the mother tongue, and not to have this early emphasis on English at home, and rather we shift the supports and thinking about what we can do within an early education context so that we are supporting children to settle in, to learn about this new culture while bringing the child's own cultural heritage into the classroom.
The home language is so important that children get that home language right, and that there's no pressure, and that when they come to an early years setting that is you know, predominantly English speaking, that parents don't feel pressure to be speaking English or engage you know, with English with their children in the home environment, that their home environment is their home, and that, you know, that this will come in time, but that they absolutely shouldn't be feeling any pressure to be speaking English as an additional language, that their mother tongue is exactly what it is that they're engaging with, and give them a good solid foundation in their language development skills. So that's really important, and that's not something that I would have been aware of, let's say 10 years ago. Do you know that it would have been, you know, well, why aren't they speaking a little bit of English at home to their children? Whereas now it's like, no, mother tongue is really important, get it right, and, you know, let them come to school and play, and, you know, it'll all fall into place.